Welcome to Political Dharma. It is October 25th, 2024, and this is Alan Zundell. Well, the presidential election here in the United States is just over a week away, about a week and a half, and I would like to tell you today what I will be watching for in the outcome of the election and immediately afterward. Now, we all know that the winner is most likely going to be either Republican Donald Trump or Democrat Kamala Harris. But what I'd like to focus on here is how big their win is and what will happen if they win or lose in terms of the future composition of their respective political parties. I'm also going to talk about the other candidates and how they perform in the election, what it'll mean for the future of alternative political candidates. Specifically, I'll be looking at Jill Stein of the Green Party, Oliver Chase of the Libertarian Party, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the former independent candidate for the presidency, whose name is still on a majority of state ballots. And then finally, a look at the initiatives that I'll be keeping an eye on in the various states. So let's get a start here. First of all, we're talking about the Republicans. And I have a graphic up on the screen with the symbol of the Republican Party, an elephant, and Donald Trump there, their candidate for the presidency. Below him, I have three figures that have been important in promoting his campaign and who should be playing a role in a future Trump administration if he wins the election. On the left, you see a picture of J.D. Vance. In case you don't recognize him, he is the vice presidential candidate. And then in the middle, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who threw his support to Donald Trump a few months ago and has been promised a position in the administration. And then finally, at the far right, Elon Musk, the tech and electric car entrepreneur who is probably the richest person in the world, and in the last couple of years has gone all out in promoting Trump's candidacy and spending money to help Trump get elected. Now, the reason I have these three on the screen is I think they each have a power base that will enable them either to jockey for position within a Trump administration, or if Trump fails to win the election, they will be jockeying for influence in picking a future president for the Republican Party in 2008. Let's go through these one at a time a little bit. J.D. Vance, as I've said in the past, he has connections with a lot of conservative intellectuals who are trying to form a vision of a Christian nationalist type of government. They are very interested in bringing this vision to the masses with a more populist message than Christians have had in the past. The assumption seems to have been among Christian activists that the majority of people in the country are Christians, so their message should resonate, but not necessarily so. So they're trying to temper their message and make it more attractive to, say, non-college educated working men who are not exactly highly animated by the issue of abortion, but finding ways to reach them more on an economic level and how the future Trump administration and a possible future J.D. Vance administration might bring them more, make them more attached to the Republican coalition. So he's going to be the vice president if Trump is elected, and he will have a role to play in the Trump administration. It's not clear how big of a role, because vice presidents can be totally isolated from the real decisions, or they can be brought in close. Now, what J.D. Vance has going for him is that he has changed a lot of positions in order to be in alignment with Trump, whether sincerely or not, I don't know. I can't read his heart. But he wants to base his position of power within the administration and getting close to Trump on the fact that he is now being loyal to Trump. And Donald Trump, in case you're not aware, puts a high premium on loyalty. Now, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., his power base is very different. He built his own grassroots movement among people in alternative health care and people who are concerned about the possible bad effects of vaccines, the so-called anti-vaxxers, and a lot of formerly independent or non-affiliated voters who are looking for a change and saw Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as a vehicle for that change outside the two-party system. He ran as a Democrat, then he ran as an independent. Now he may be able to bring in some of those independent voters to the Republican coalition. So his power base is other than J.D. Vance's. J.D. Vance's has a foot in the world of Christian evangelicals and conservative Catholics and their think tanks and college networks. RFK Jr. has a foothold in his own grassroots fundraising abilities and a large following with an alternative health, anti-vax, and other movements. And then finally, Elon Musk. He's an interesting figure, and I haven't really figured out where he's coming from. He used to have positions that were not close to Donald Trump, but in the last couple of years, he's gone all in on Trumpian positions. In the last couple of weeks, he's campaigned for Trump very vigorously. He's donated over $100 million to promote Trump's candidacy and given tens of millions to other Republican candidates to have some kind of influence within the Republican Party. Now, his positions on issues has started to reflect Trump very closely, just like J.D. Vance. He's against immigration. He's also against the transgender laws that would give rights to transgenders. He just seems to have come a long way from where he previously was in order to back Trump. And again, how sincere that is, I have no way of knowing. He seems sincere and he's pouring a lot of money into this. Now, the odd thing about him is that with Vance and RFK, I can see them using their position within a Trump administration or using their position within this campaign if Trump loses to jockey for a position as a future president. But Elon Musk is disqualified for running for president, or at least holding the office of president, because he is himself an immigrant to the United States from South Africa. Now, maybe they are planning some kind of constitutional amendment to change that on his behalf, but it seems more reasonable to assume that he wants to become part of the Trump administration or an inside person with some influence over Trump's decisions in order to benefit his own financial prospects and also to reduce government regulation in general, because one of the consistent things about him is he's had a kind of libertarian mindset. Now, all of these figures talk about free speech rights and want to get rid of a government or change the direction of government insofar as suppressing any kind of speech, whether or not it's false or outrageously misleading or whatever else. They feel that, and I believe similarly, that you should counter speech that's erroneous with speech that's true and factual, and have to back up your case, because even though it sounds good to censor things that you think are dangerous misinformation, who has the power to censor that is also a question that could backfire on us very easily. So these three figures have power bases and have the ear of Trump to some degree. If Trump wins, I'd be looking to how they are able to jockey for greater influence within that administration. And here I think RFK has the harder position because he has not shown himself to be 100% on board with Trump's positions on every issue. And he says if Trump was asking him to do something he disagreed with, he would not go along with it. So as Donald Trump, as I said, puts a premium on loyalty, he may not, at some point, he may ask RFK to do something and RFK may refuse, or he may, or RFK may be asking him to do something he doesn't want to do and Trump might not like the pressure. So that he's the one that I think would have the hardest time staying within a Trump administration, given how erratic Trump can be and the kind of things he tends to ask of people. But if he ends up resigning from office, if he does get a position in the Trump administration, which is not a guarantee, probably in the areas of the Food and Drug Administration or the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, he may end up having to leave that position. And if he does, I think he will be in a position still in 2008 to try to gain the Republican nomination because Trump will not be eligible to run for a third term, again, unless they change the Constitution or try to change the Constitution. Not an easy thing to do, by the way. So he may be able to parlay his support for Trump, even if he has to leave the administration, into a future run at the presidency, because there's a lot of overlap between RFK's base of support and MAGA people, and a little less, I think, for J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance, his base of support is more rooted in conventional conservative Christians within the Republican Party. So I don't think he has the same kind of grassroots support that RFK has. Now, Elon Musk, what is his future going to be? Well, he doesn't need a job, but he's been promised some kind of job in a commission on government efficiency, which seems to have to do with reducing government bureaucracy and regulations and giving free rein to corporations. He reminds me actually of the Russian oligarchs, where they are trying to parlay political influence into money and money into political influence, because what, they want more and more power and money, and they like to play the game, and they believe in their own genius or something along that lines. I don't know, I haven't figured him out, and I'm not sure what the future holds for him, but he is a figure to watch because his power base is his money, which he has a heck of a lot of, and his platform on X, which was formerly Twitter, which he owns and uses and abuses in my eyes to some extent. Anyway, so that's my questions. That's what I'm watching in the election here. If Trump wins, what kind of positions these people will have within his administration, not just formal titles, but how much influence they have. And if he doesn't win, what their prospects are for influencing the future presidential nominee of the Republican Party. It will say a lot about the future of this party, which in my mind is already undergoing a major transformation or realignment, because a lot of the old Republican elite is moving away from Trump, even the big corporate donors. He seems to be attracting more of the rich people who have locally based businesses rather than the big corporate CEOs, as well as entrepreneurial billionaires like Elon Musk, who like the style of Trump, being himself a billionaire who projects an image of someone who doesn't care what anyone thinks, and he's just going to do what he thinks is right. Elon Musk is a lot like that. So their roles in determining who's going to be the next nominee of the Republican Party and which direction the administration would be pulled in, that's what I'll be watching there. Not only if Trump wins or loses, but how big or little. Even though it's a close election, you got to remember that if each of these swing states tips even slightly towards one of the major party candidates, as opposed to being divided in which way they go, it could look like a landslide in the Electoral College, and of course that's what they'll call it, a landslide mandate for themselves. So I'll be looking at how big the Electoral College result is in the outcome of the election. So let's turn now to the Democrats and what's going on there. This is a little less of a mystery because the fissure line within the Democratic Party has been between the Democratic establishment, who relies a lot on corporate donors, and the progressive wing of the party. Now with Joe Biden, he brought Bernie Sanders and the progressives like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez a little bit closer into the fold. He gave them roles to play on commissions, and they were at the table and helping to shape the kinds of major bills that Biden put forward. Biden had some appointees to offices in the government that were a little more pro-labor than in the past. He put environmental policies into his big infrastructure bill, and the one that was supposed to be a companion bill, as well as a lot of programs meant to help lower income and middle income families, like tax credits for families and things of that nature. So the progressives were able to have a seat at the table in the Biden administration, even though I did not perceive Biden as pushing real hard for their priorities. And in fact, he got his infrastructure bill through in what may have been an intentional maneuver. And then by dividing up these priorities into two bills, he didn't push as hard for the other bill that had most of the progressive priorities, as he did for his own bill for the infrastructure spending, which he hoped would give him a boost in this year's election. But people still have not connected his bill to any kind of major changes in their lives. Anyway, the question is Harris going to bring the progressives in as Biden did, or is he going to push them back out as, say, the Clinton or Barack Obama administrations had done? I think so far she's showing signs that she's going to freeze them out and be even less amenable to listening to them than Biden was, even though in the past she's taken some positions that are on the progressive end of the spectrum, like backing Medicare for all. She's changed her mind about those things, and she says it's because she's learned to be more pragmatic about what is possible, which I assume not only means what you can get through Congress, but what you can get that's acceptable to your major donors. Instead, she's brought into the fold Republicans like Liz Cheney, the daughter of Dick Cheney, the former vice president under George W. Bush, and herself a former member of the House of Representatives. There's a lot of anti-Trump Republicans that are now endorsing Harris and helping her campaign. And are they going to stick with her in the future, or is this just to get Trump out of the way so they can return to the Republican Party and try to regain control there? Now, the anti-Trump, or I should say the more traditional Republicans, have not been totally driven out of the Republican Party. And these Republicans, along the lines of Liz Cheney and those who have been endorsing Harris, may have the intention of seeing Trump get out of the way so they can go back in and regain some kind of control over the party. But if Trump wins, they'll be out in the cold and they'll have a lot of bleak opportunities. So they may decide to work within the Democratic Party a little more, and how the Democratic Party goes if Harris loses, who will be their next candidate is totally up for grabs. A progressive may run, but they probably get frozen out and pushed aside like Bernie Sanders did. So the future of the party will be very much in doubt if Harris loses. Who will be the future nominee, which direction the party will go in. But I would predict that Republicans will try to come closer into the fold, and the donors will try to take it to a more right-wing position and try hard to keep progressives out. Now, what progressives will do in that case, I don't know. If Harris loses, they no longer have a seat at the table anyway. They'll be once again in the opposition to Republicans, and their base is probably going to feel like no matter what we do, nothing matters, so drop out of politics entirely, because they were not able to win a nomination, and then they were not able to help centrist candidates like Harris win anyway. So if she wins, though, who will have influence? Will the progressives be brought in or not? I predict that not, not so much as previously, and previously wasn't all that much to begin with. And then in the event she loses, I think there'll be a consolidation of a rightward drift as the Republicans lose more of their traditional members, and Trump and the people associated with him build a more different kind of a coalition. So that's what I'll be watching for. If Harris wins or loses, and then by how much, and then the repercussions this will have for either the progressive having a voice within the party, or these more establishment Republicans moving into the Democratic Party to help the center-right people who have been controlling it gain even more control over the party apparatus. That's what I'll be watching for. Who wins, who loses, by how much, and then which kind of groups jockeying for position within the parties are able to gain control of it. And beyond that, I've been mostly in this show talking about the minor party and alternative candidates, so those I'm going to pay even closer attention to. And the main thing I want to know is what kind of a vote total they'll be able to get. I doubt if any of them are going to win. This would be a remarkable achievement and a last-minute turnaround with unprecedented historical significance. So you see there the candidates who are on the most ballots and have the best chance of getting a relatively high, for alternative candidates, percentage of the vote: Jill Stein of the Green Party, Chase Oliver of the Libertarian Party, and RFK Jr., who is no longer running for president, but who still has a lot of supporters who have the opportunity to vote for him because his name will be on their ballots. And a lot of them say they're going to do this. I don't know how many actually will do that and follow through on it. So the question I'll have is, how well do each of these candidates do in relation to past efforts of alternative candidates? Will any of them be able to meet or exceed the 5% threshold for getting additional public funding in future runs or not? I'm not very hopeful for any of them. And if RFK did get a high enough percentage to meet the 5% threshold, he would actually have money he could use in a future candidacy, no matter what party he was running for. So say he wanted to run for the Republican nomination, he would be able to use that money. In the event that none of them make the 5% threshold, I'd be looking to see how high the percentage of the vote each of them actually get, or if there's any surprises from any of the other alternative candidates, like Cornel West or any of the other minor party candidates. And then finally, what will the cumulative impact of this vote be? How big of a percentage do they all get together, which generally is not very high? Is it going to exceed the average of the last few presidential elections or not? I'll be looking at that as well. All right, so that's it for the candidates. The other thing I'll be watching for in this upcoming election, other than how the candidates do, is the several voting reform initiatives happening in states across the nation, or mostly in the West. Because I, like many other Americans, have been very unhappy with the choices given to us by the two major parties, which neither one seems to be especially responsive to the voters' concerns, even though they rhetorically sometimes address those concerns. Often in policy terms, they're not. I take in particular the feeling that people have that they're losing ground economically, nothing seems to change, and worried about spending so much money on military issues abroad and sending weapons and spending money rather than helping people at home. Anyway, I have the sense that the two-party system has gone very much off the tracks, if it ever was on the tracks in the first place. But if these minor party and alternative candidates, independent candidates, are ever going to be able to shake up the two-party system, they're going to have to be able to show some ability to get large support. In the past, minor parties have sprung up to capture issues that have been neglected by the major parties and built up enough support, especially in a presidential campaign, to show that the major parties have to adopt and maybe adapt that issue, or at least co-opt it or bring that group within the fold in some way. So forcing the two parties to change is something that minor parties and alternative candidates have done in the past, but in the last several decades, the major parties have made it more and more difficult for minor party candidates even to get on the ballot or stay on the ballot if they do get on the ballot, or just a lot of obstacles, which I've been detailing ad nauseum in this podcast over the last year covering the presidential election. So voting reform is a big thing because that would enable minor parties to show their true level of support, or at least have some kind of access, potential access into the political system that they do not have now. Now, the measures that'll be on the ballot are not the ones that I would have preferred in the main, because I think their potential for allowing greater access into the political system is very limited, and in some cases might even make it more difficult. But I'm going to keep an eye on these to see what the public appetite is for changing voting methods, if any of them is able to pass, or in one case, if voters actually repeal one of these reform experiments. So you see, most of the states where this is happening have open primaries. Open primary does not mean what it used to mean, which is that voters who are not affiliated with a party can choose to vote in one of the party's nomination contests. That is, in the primary election, an independent candidate could choose to vote in the Republican nomination process, or choose alternatively to vote in the Democratic primary process. That's what open primaries used to mean. Now what it means is all the candidates from whatever party, and even candidates, 2 candidates, 3 candidates from the same party, doesn't matter. All the candidates, no matter what their party affiliation, would run in the same election. and all the voters, no matter what their party affiliation, would vote in that primary election. And then they have some kind of rules for determining what happens as far as advancing candidates to the general election and then how to vote on those. So the states that have open primaries on the ballot would be about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 states plus the District of Columbia. And if you can see the map in this video, I have shaded those all in purple. Let's start with the ones that are in the mid-range purple, open primaries, and then 4 or 5 candidates who have the highest votes in the primary would go to the general election and be chosen by a process of ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting is when voters are able to rank all the candidates in order of preference on their ballot, and then a candidate has to get a majority of votes to win. So they count the first choice votes. If there's no majority, last place candidate is bumped out, and those voters' ballots are redistributed to the next choice, and so on until one of the candidates gets a majority of the remaining ballots, which may not be all the ballots you started out with, and wins the general election. So states that have on the ballot, and voters can choose if they want to institute this method of voting, would have open primaries in the primary and then ranked choice voting in the general election. Those states are Colorado, Idaho, Nevada, and then way over there on the East Coast, which you can barely see, the little purple dot is the District of Columbia, where Washington, D.C. And the state capital is, well, state capital, the national capital is. The state of South Dakota in the darker purple is going to vote on having an open primary with only 2 candidates, the top 2 advancing to the general election. This is the same method we have here in California and that they have up in Washington. Washington's done this since 2004 and California since 2010. Not my favorite method. That really tends to freeze minor party and alternative candidates out of the general election. But in some ways, it could be an advantage to them because they can consolidate the support within a primary election because voters don't have to worry so much about the lesser evil. I'm not going to get into that deeply in this show. I'm just saying these are what I'm going to watch. So South Dakota, voting on an open primary plus a top 2, and then those top 2, the voters vote in the general election to pick one of them. And then finally, in the lighter purple color, there are initiatives in Montana and Arizona that would have an open primary, and then the state legislature would determine what kind of method they're going to use to advance candidates to the general election and what kind of method of voting they'll use in the general election. So it's open primary plus who knows what, to be determined. I think they did that because ranked choice voting may have a bum rap, but once they have an open primary, they'll have to decide between a limited number of options of what to do in the general election. Either top 2 or some form of ranked choice voting would be the most well-known methods. Otherwise, they'll be out on going beyond what any other state has done to use something different, which I'd rather see anyway, like a star voting election. Finally, up there in Oregon, in the color blue, Oregon is not having an open primary on the ballot, but they will have ranked choice voting on the ballot, at least for some of their offices, federal offices, such as senator and members of Congress, as well as statewide offices, governor, secretary of state, state treasurer, and the labor commissioner. But not an open primary, just the ranked choice voting. So I'll be watching, interested to see how that turns out. And I lived in Oregon for nearly 20 years promoting ranked choice voting for half that time and star voting for half that time. So I'd like to see how far voters have come towards that, maybe far enough to get something in place, maybe not. And then finally, Alaska has an initiative to repeal their open primary and ranked choice voting elections method because there's been considerable dissatisfaction, especially among Republicans, since they had a ranked choice voting election which elected a Democrat. So they are working against it. There's been a lot of dissatisfaction within the state. And in fact, in a lot of state legislatures, there's been efforts to repeal or to ban ranked choice voting in any form because the experience that Republicans had in Alaska primarily. All right, so that's what I'm going to be watching for in this upcoming election. A lot of things to think about, a lot of things to assess once the election's over. I'm not sure what else I'm going to be talking about in the coming weeks. I'm sure next weekend I will have some news to talk about. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. actually just yesterday, I think, he made another appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court having to do with getting his name off the ballot in Wisconsin. That would be a real last-minute change. I'm not sure what kind of success they'll have, so I'll be watching that. And there's other court cases involving ballot access, and who knows what will come up in the interim. That'll be next weekend will be my last show before the election, and then after the election, I'll be doing an initial assessment and then further analyses down the road, and then talking about how people interested in changing our political system, what we can do going forward. Not sure if I'll come up with other ideas in the meantime, but at least I'll be doing that much. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your likes, your shares, your subscriptions, especially your shares. I'd like more people to see this show. If you think it has something of value, please recommend it to other people. And then finally, if you can afford it, money helps. I plan to use whatever money I've been collecting through this show, like through ads or donations, to help launch some kind of project to take on the two-party system. I'm not sure exactly what the configuration is. I have some ideas. I'll talk about that later. So if you want to donate to Political Dharma, go to politicaldharma.com. If you want to become a Patreon member, patreon.com/politicaldharma. Or if you just want to send well wishes, you can do that without going anywhere. Just right now, sitting in your own seat at home. Send a blessing. All right. And hope you keep on watching. Thanks. Bye.
With ease, I see the chains are breaking. We've gained our focus. The moves we're making will prove to determine our self-worth as a passenger on this vehicle Earth.